myself, we're super excited to talk to you guys about our vision for what Ford's Michigan Central Station will be. I'm also looking forward to talking about our latest collaboration. And so really happy to have Sean Stewart, the CEO of New Lab, here with me today. And together we'll be talking about the amazing things that we're imagining for the future of mobility. So I'll kick things off sharing a little bit about our vision. So the vision for the Michigan Central district is really an innovation district. And so we're looking to open up a platform that's really there for everyone. It will not be a Ford campus. We're interested in bringing other mobility innovators into this space where we can imagine and develop and test solutions together, solutions for urban transportation problems, immediate as well as problems in the future. We have 5 guiding principles, and these principles are so important to our team. They really drive all of the decisions that we make. The first one is around building the future of mobility. I think that makes so much sense, as well as optimizing for innovation. But in doing this, we want to ensure that we're inclusive, that we're inviting everyone in, and that we do that authentically. So really important to us is celebrating the place that we're in. Corktown, the historic nature of that space, the city of Detroit, the Motor City, as well as Michigan being the automotive capital of the world. Those have been such important things to Ford in our history. And so we are celebrating that in this space. And our last principle, which I think is so important and probably just my very favorite, is to create equity and really showcase opportunities where everyone can come in and be a part of this place. Our point of view, and really the edge that we see, the advantage of this space, will be that Michigan Central can provide a real-world testing opportunity. We're going to have connectivity and infrastructure that evolves as requirements change. There'll be collaboration, not only amongst mobility companies, but also with adjacent industries. We're really building the smart world from the ground up in this place. And Michigan Central will be a powerful node on a mobility network that already exists in Michigan. It will connect and complement local and regional assets. The Book Depository is a building just beside the train station, and this is our first building to come online. It'll open in 2022. I heard it referenced recently as a bit of a sleeper, but it's actually my very favorite part of the development. Not only because it's first, but mostly because of what it signifies. It's really the foundation. It's going to help us curate an ecosystem that powers innovation. We see this building as the soul of the innovation district, where people come together, they bring ideas, they test solutions, and they really make and create things. We also think it's really important to curate the space and the partners that are in it so that it can build a larger ecosystem that will connect the other spaces and the other buildings that are in the district. At the same time as the Book Depository, we're also going to be bringing on a mobility platform. And this is the space that's just east of the train station. It's about 7.2 acres. We plan to turn this space into something that's both private and public. So it will be a one-of-a-kind opportunity to really showcase solutions. It'll have mobility demo areas and testing. A great feature that I don't think you can see it here, we don't have an image of it, but this will actually connect us right to a greenway that's being developed by the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. And that'll be a 1-mile greenway all the way down to the riverfront. This slide really talks about the community. And so I just want to be really clear. We recognize that we're building our district in an urban area. We're neighbors. We are in people's backyards. We've already engaged with the community from the day that we set foot in 2018 in purchasing the station. And we continue this engagement. In fact, yesterday we had a really exciting community meeting. We had 2 of them. And that's an opportunity for us to not only share what's happening in the development, but also to listen and get feedback. And so it was a fantastic meeting. Thank you. If you were there, I hope it was as valuable to you as it was to us. Partners are super important. Obviously, Sean is here with us today. announcing our first collaboration, but we really recognize that we need partners from so many sectors. There'll be other corporates in this space, even competitors. There'll be startups and entrepreneurs, academics, universities and schools, STEM programs. We see an opportunity for so much education in this space. And also a nonprofit and foundation component. Those areas will play an important part in bringing this district to life. So if you haven't read the news that came out yesterday, as I said, we've collaborated with New Lab, and this is such a great moment for our team. We're really excited about this opportunity. We announced the work of 2 studios that'll kick off in the 3rd quarter of this year. The first studio is a corporate studio sponsored by Ford, and we're going to be looking at macro mobility issues. Let me be clear. We'll be looking at large issues and really taking a dive into those with New Lab and using their phenomenal model to bring solutions to these problems. We're also launching a civic studio, and I think this is really great. In my role, I actually have a large external engagements is not just partners, but it also involves the community. And so this civic studio is really near and dear to my heart. I'm so excited because we've been listening, as I said, and we've heard the immediate issues that the community is facing around transportation. And we want this civic studio to be directed to those problems. And so this is really an opportunity to invite others in. We want to listen. We really, really want to hear what's happening and what those challenges are and how we can work together to solve those. And finally, this is our last Michigan Central slide, and it's really a future rendering of what we think the district will be. Of course, an innovation district where we can use the streets and the infrastructure to solve problems around transportation. We really are looking forward to this being an open platform. And so just very clearly, we do not intend to bring a Ford campus down to this space. It's not a typical real estate development. It's actually a place to think and imagine and bring to life fantastic ideas that solve problems. So with that, I'll turn it over. I have a few questions to ask Sean, and I think we'll go through these questions and then we'll take some questions from you all. So Sean, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for such a great overview. We should start every event with the Detroit Youth Choir. I feel like that's a good way to get started.
They're pretty amazing. That was a wonderful event.
Totally.
So Sean, some people attending today might not have ever heard of New Lab. Can you give them an overview of the company and its community?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, and certainly wouldn't be too surprising. We've existed for about 3 to 4 years. We're based in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in New York City. And our history actually goes back, although the business has been in operation for 4 years, our history goes back much further, actually to the turn of the century. The building you see, if you go back just one to that previous slide, that building is building 128 in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a couple minute ferry ride to Wall Street and 34th Street, nestled in between Dumbo and Williamsburg, if you know Brooklyn. And this building actually, at the turn of the century, was used by the Navy for building the battleships, the arsenal for World War I and World War II. The USS Missouri came out of this building, the USS Arizona as well. And so at the height of the Second World War, you had, I think, about 16,000 employees across the Brooklyn Navy Yard who were coming every day from around New York City. The land ended up going back into city hands and kind of midway through the century, and didn't have as much activity until they started focusing on revitalizing the neighborhood, bringing more businesses and employment to the district, and focusing on advanced manufacturing and innovation across the 300 acres. Very similar to some of the ambitions from Michigan Central and for the Corktown project in general. And so we were approached by the Bloomberg administration with the interesting opportunity of what would we do if we had access to this building across the long term. And our founders, David Belt and Scott Cohen, they responded to this amazing opportunity by saying that there was a need to develop a home in New York City for entrepreneurs and technologists building companies in advanced technology, both hardware and software. there was a view that there wasn't a lot of this activity in New York, similar to sometimes you hear that there's not a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on in the state of Michigan. But the reality is that there is. It's all over the place, happening in such a disparate amount of different programs and activities and university campuses. But what we needed in New York was a center of gravity, a place that brought them all together, that gave them the facilities they needed, the ecosystems, the program, community to support each other, as well as interactions and partnerships with corporate and government bodies. And so over the course of 2 or 3 years, we spent $65 million converting this building into what you see in front of you today. It's an 86,000 square foot facility. It opened 4 years ago with just 100 entrepreneurs building 30 different companies. And over the course of 4 years has grown now to north of 800 different technologists based right here in Brooklyn. They're building 155 different companies in advanced technology, everything from quantum computers to biofabrication. We have teams growing leather from collagen, growing bricks from mycelium. They're really tackling some substantial challenges that the world is facing through advanced technology. And so that's what our community does. We apply transformative technology to things that matter. And so in the 4 years that we've been here, those 155 companies have grown here, but many of them have graduated and actually moved out into the Navy Yard and other parts of Brooklyn and New York to grow their businesses. We've had more than $450 million worth of acquisitions occur from within the community. The combined valuation of all the companies grew to north of $2 billion. And many of our companies grew to hundreds and hundreds of employees that then ended up growing throughout the Navy Yard and throughout New York. One of the Urban Futures reports last year showed that 11% of the tech job growth in Brooklyn had come from this building, from this community, because of the amount of activity happening here. And so that's New Lab does. What New Lab does today is really 3 major things. It's quite simple. One is we provide an incredible home for these entrepreneurs so that they can grow their businesses with the infrastructure and the support and the community they need. You see these terrifying stats that 90% of startups fail. In this community, we're seeing a much stronger success rate because they have $8 million worth of prototyping equipment. There's wood shops and metal shops and biofabrication labs, textiles benches, everything they need to build their products and their visions. But you also have themselves, the community they benefit from. So our core mission is providing everything entrepreneurs need to succeed. Our second area of operation are the studios we're going to talk about today, these innovation studios. And that came about from our first studio with the New York City government more than 3 years ago around urban tech, which we'll talk about a little bit today, and the model itself. And this is convening 4 major stakeholder groups that we'll talk about with the hopes of making significant progress around challenges that the city or the planet is witnessing. And then our third area of operation is we help fund and source capital for these startups. It's one thing to have a great idea and to be able to operationalize it. It's another to be able to find the funding and the capital you need to successfully grow your business. We've had more than 300 VCs invest in companies from New Lab. We've invested ourselves in over 20 of the companies so far. And so we play a role in making sure they find the appropriate funding and support to grow their businesses.
Thanks, Sean. That's a great overview, and it really speaks volumes to why Ford was so excited to meet with New Lab, come out to your space, and see how successful you've been. It's just amazing.
Thanks, Julie.
Before we jump into the studio work, though, I think, I kind of like to connect the information that I shared at the beginning and kind of what you've shared. And so if you could talk to us a bit about how you see New Lab contributing to the mobility ecosystem that our development's going to be bringing online.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. Like certainly to begin with, we have north of 150 companies here, many in mobility, developing technology that they want to expand their operations to other parts of the country, other geographies to pilot. And obviously the history behind mobility and Ford, I mean, Detroit's the beating heart of mobility in this country. Ford, one of the most well-known and certainly impactful brands in that field. So there's no better place to get involved with mobility than Detroit. So the first piece is we bring these companies that are already focused on mobility, started here in New York or other parts of the world, and we're able to expand their operations and also bring them to Michigan. The second is the studio products, which has become a model for us on how we bring together academic institutions. You have 300,000 or more than that students across the state of Michigan, all working in incredibly relevant areas Then you have government bodies, folks like the Michigan EDC, all the way through urban planning departments. That's the second key stakeholder group that our studios always needs to focus on and involve. The third is corporate representation from the industry. Ford is going to be a great example to provide insight into what's working in mobility and where the challenges are. And then the fourth group you have are the entrepreneurs and technologists themselves. And isolated, each one finds it difficult to make the progress they need. Just a government department, just an academic institution, just a corporate, or just a startup. But what happens when you bring them all together and put them in a concerted effort to make progress across a 12-month cycle around specific challenges that mobility is facing, whether it's in the corporate world or in the civic world in regards to local transportation in and around Detroit? What we found over the last 4 years is you see immense progress, immense amount of output, and real tangible pilots that end up developing insights through new technologies that can improve the areas of focus for the studio. And then the last piece I'd mention is certainly we're not walking into an ecosystem that's starting from ground zero. Just like New York, this hasn't been a success of New Lab in isolation. It's taken a range of different partners to team up with. We have partnerships with accelerators and incubators, partnerships with other ecosystems similar to us, but less focused on frontier technology, partnerships with Cornell Tech and Columbia, partnerships with the EDC and a range of other different government departments and bodies. We come together to work as a group, as a united front of the tech ecosystem here in New York to make progress. We've formed advisor groups with multiple different departments and business entities, or participated in other people's advisor groups. We co-host events and workshops. We've had to provide our facility to a range of programs that can operate here in New York and would want to have the same type of community approach in Detroit and the state of Michigan. We help with strategic recruiting. You have a range of really interesting programs already in place in Michigan, whether it's Lean Rocket or Automation Alley. We love the folks at Tech Town. So sometimes we provide a new home once people come out of programs and then need a permanent location. Our startups are permanently based in our building and our ecosystem. And so we allow for like a next step, a graduation path sometimes for the early stage companies built in programs that exist. And then the last part is grant proposals, is that many of our kind of big ambitious programs, whether it's responsible AI or urban tech, they're never just New Lab. They're always multiple different organizations coming together with the combined benefit that each of our components is stronger as a total sum when you unify us. And so we really are excited by all the progress that's already happened in Detroit and feel that we can bring some additive kind of new value and new assets to that recipe.
That's fantastic. I was just thinking about the word additive because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like such a great opportunity for us. And of course, that's why we're so excited about it. And we're excited to share all of this news. I think I'd like to jump into some conversation around the studios now.
Right.
So I think just giving an overview of the studios would be great and how they work, how they're different and unique. They're just amazing in my opinion, but I'd love for you to share that with everyone else.
No, I totally appreciate it. Yeah, and we're thrilled to be expanding these efforts to Detroit as our first location outside of New York City. The first piece you see in front of you is the right place to start, which is there are 4 key kind of stakeholder groups that are involved in any studio. You obviously have the entrepreneurs and the engineers and the inventors, and we have a community here in Brooklyn of those, but we really go out globally searching for IP that's been filed, research papers, technologists in early stage prototyping. And sometimes it's not even technologists that are focused on mobility as an example. They may be building something that's relevant to the railway network, but also has appropriate use cases in passenger vehicles, or technology used in the medical field that actually does have applications in autonomous vehicles or whatever it could be. So we go out and we do global RFPs. We invite companies and technologists and startups to apply to be part of the studio. And they tell us what they're working on, what technology they've developed, what IP they have, and why they'd be relevant to this 12-month studio program. Then you have corporate partners, in this case, Ford and Michigan Central, but you need them at the table too. The big kind of cruise ships of industry, they might find it harder to pivot like a small startup, but they have decades of experience, massive amounts of resource and insight, customer base, data. They have a lot of valuable assets that need to come to the table, and their perspective needs to be shared as part of the studio, and they need to be involved throughout that life cycle. Then you have civic and government organizations, especially when you're talking about local mobility. If we don't have the perspective of local citizens, local organizations, then you're missing a key voice and a key ingredient. And then the last piece is coming back to that amazing Ann Arbor kind of Michigan ecosystem of academic systems and universities, is that you want researchers and academics at the table as well. Some of the most cutting edge technology is developed on university campuses. And you really want that kind of forward thinking to be involved in the studio, but also to do research and analysis of the data developed and the insights developed so that you can create papers and research reports on what's actually occurred in the studio to ensure it continues to scale and have impact. So that's starting with the who, right? This is the 4 major groups we bring together. And then if you jump to the next page, it's the what. Like, what does 12 months of this cycle look like in an innovation studio? And the first is we kick off usually with workshops with internal teams, understanding what Michigan Central's objectives are, what Ford's objectives are, and you start to figure out kind of tracks of focus or areas that we may actually develop within the studio. Then we kick off usually 3 months of research. We go out to look at both Ford as an example, look at Detroit and its local mobility solutions, but also do a scouring of the world of all the patents that have been filed, IP that's been developed, startups that are focused on mobility, whether they're in Germany or Australia. We want to know about them. And so we have our team that goes out there and assesses and then also launches RFPs so that we're aware of the relevant technology that could be used in this studio. And then we usually come out of that research with insights into what tracks we should focus on. Is one track autonomous vehicles? Is another electrification? Is a third public transportation systems and insights into arrival times? We can come up with whatever the tracks are that we're going to focus on. Usually between 3 and 5 tracks exist within each studio. And this is where the exciting stuff starts, which is you start to build prototypes. You're building hardware and software from these technologists with the corporations involved, with the academic institutions. You're building actual product and technology that is then in the final stage across 6 or 9 months going to actually be piloted. So if you build technology that you say is going to make it better for people to understand bus times as an example of micromobility, then you go try it and you see if it works and you get feedback from the people involved. You continue to iterate on that product. And so when you look at it overall, you're going through this entire 12-month cycle of doing deep research and assessing all the technology globally that's being developed. Then you're convening and bringing those teams to Detroit. People are bringing their technology from around the world to launch their companies and their product pilots in the state of Michigan. And then we support them in building the R&D efforts of building that technology and those prototypes. And then we finish by actually piloting them. And so if you step back a little bit, if you look at those 4 stakeholder groups, you have these entrepreneurs and technologists and startups who value this opportunity at an incredible level because they get to work with government, with academia, with corporations to perfect their product, to get feedback on their technology, to actually see how it performs in the real world application. They also find tangential applications. We have people in studios who were designing technology for the mining industry, and it's suddenly perfectly used in the mobility space as an example. Then you have the corporate entities which get access to early stage IP that's being developed, some of the most advanced technologists in the world, and they get to review and experience this early stage technology to decide what they should invest in, what they should license, what they should acquire, what they should or should not use. These are experiments of high value that you get to learn from. The academic institutions get to be on the front line of testing technology, putting their research into action. And then the government bodies just get a wider breadth of talent to focus on their problems. Sometimes governments feel that they're limited in access to advanced technology, but they often have the biggest problems out there, the most important things for us to focus on. So sorry for hogging a lot of time, but that kind of walks through the entire end-to-end 12-month experience.
I think that's great because the studio concept can be a bit of a mystery without that explanation. So I do really appreciate that. I've come to understand it better and better. And I think it's just such an amazing model. We're really excited about it. Maybe you could tell everyone about a few of the studios that you guys are operating out of Brooklyn right now.
Yeah, for sure. We have a Verizon 5G studio that's operating here in the Navy Yard. Verizon installed is installing a 300-acre 5G network across the Brooklyn Navy Yard campus. And then we're attracting technologists from around the world to come build products that could benefit from 5G network. And the diversity you see in this type of studio is everything from people looking at how you unload ships off the East River using 5G tech for the dock unloading and loading process, through to remote operations of autonomous vehicles using 5G technology, testing out drone delivery of medical devices and medical supplies using 5G as a new kind of form of bandwidth and data flow for the products. So that has been one of our kind of more interesting ones. But the model actually started in a studio that probably has the most relevance, which was the Urban Tech Studio. And that started 3 and a bit years ago, has now been renewed and continued to be funded by multiple different organizations across the last 3 years, but was originally launched by the New York City EDC and New Lab with a focus of making New York City more livable for its citizens. And our focus was how to utilize frontier technology to improve the insights and data collected out there in the urban environment, then give researchers and academics that new kind of pipe of data combined with government data to improve the livelihood of New Yorkers. That studio deployed sensors on taxis through Carmera, which was a company that did LiDAR mapping, so that we could have data to actually understand how dense are the pedestrian kind of block by block pedestrian density in New York by hour. So when you're deciding on closing a street, you can actually have data on how many people go across that block from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. We put sensors on lampposts that help do everything from track vehicles to tell you how long a bag of garbage sits out front of a store. We often put up scaffolding in New York City, and retail establishments tell you that if you put up scaffolding in front of my store, it's going to massively impact my revenue. But nobody actually knows how much. How much does foot traffic decline at the Foot Locker if you put up scaffolding? Through a company called Numina, we were able to deploy sensors on lampposts that could actually track that kind of movement. If you close the street for a street fair, we could tell you how many people switched to using city bikes as a form of transportation. Where did all the cars go when the actual street closure existed? So the Urban Tech Studio was a great example of how we focused on this model and an array of amazing technologists at New Lab to try to provide more insights to improve the livelihood and kind of the day-to-day experience here in New York.
That's great. It's so many interesting studios happening out of Brooklyn. It makes me think about our mobility studio and your interest in coming to Detroit. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what makes Detroit the right place for a mobility studio.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a step back, the kind of model we launched here in New Lab in Brooklyn was incredibly successful. Over the course of 3 and a bit years, we had 1,600 companies apply to be based here. We only had room for 155 of them. We only accepted about 9% of them. Some weren't utilizing the type of technology we kind of focus on. Others were too big or too early, depending on the fit. But we were able to really build an ecosystem that started to drive forward kind of the growth of technology and startups of that type in Brooklyn. And so then we looked at where should we go next? Like what cities are ideal for this type of kind of structure and this type of business? And so we built a model, like everyone, focus on data, get a bunch of insights. And we looked at ranking kind of the talent coming out of academia, the activity from corporations, the type of government support you're seeing, the type of capital available for starting early stage businesses and ventures. And we had this model built that looked at all of these different data points and then ranked places in the country that had already very strong technology ecosystems, like some of the players we mentioned, but also had opportunity to grow even further. Population size, graduating student base, fields of technology that were being focused on in academia. And in all of the modeling, Detroit just kept coming in the top spot, number 1 or number 2 or number 3, like almost always across all of these key metrics. And it makes sense. All of those pieces exist. There's fantastic industry, advanced manufacturing. Some of the largest companies in the country are based out of Michigan. Then you have a very active government kind of system. The MEDC has done a lot of work in building programs for the state of Michigan. Then you have great academic institutions, which I keep mentioning, I'll try to stop. And then you have a growing amount of incubators, accelerators, all these different environments and systems to help entrepreneurs. And so it was a no-brainer for us. It was just, how do we find the right opportunity, the right location, and if we're being candid, the right corporation with similar DNA, similar ambitions. And I think our discovery of Michigan Central and the work you're doing and the ambitions around revitalizing the Corktown area and growing kind of the offering there, it really felt similar to what we did in Brooklyn over the last 4 years. And we're more excited about that than going to San Francisco and being kind of another similar ecosystem there as an example.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Like I said, we're so happy to have you and really excited about kicking off this studio work. So let's talk a little bit about the actual studios. I mentioned that there'll be a corporate studio where Ford's the sponsor looking at macro issues, transportation issues. So do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the focus areas for that studio and what you see might happen there?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty is we don't come in as the expert. Like, we have the structure and the program, and we have the team that are able to make sure the studios make the progress they're seeking, hit the objectives they outline. And so we go in with a very kind of blank slate, no assumptions about what is going to be the best use case of our time or the best use of the studio. One of your favorite examples is the stink bug example from one of our shipping studios. There was a studio that focused on sea freight, of moving massive cargo containers across the oceans from continent to continent, country to country. And our original first discussion with the corporation that sponsored that studio around shipping said, we want to focus on digitizing our supply chain. The best use of time is to figure out how you can track and trace everything that's going on and off ships. And so we said, great, let's start the research and discovery, kick off some workshops, and let's see what we uncover as being the best use of our time. And one of the things that came up in one of those sessions was that this company and the shipping industry overall loses billions of dollars every year of merchandise and cargo, as well as a massive negative kind of footprint in regards to carbon offsets and the environment, because they move ships from Europe to Australia, and when they arrive at a dock, they test positive for stink bugs, these little bugs that get in cargo containers and can destroy the materials and the products that they include. And they're usually refused port entry and sent back to where they came from because of these infestations. And so for track one of that studio, we said, we have to focus on this. There's technology out there that can identify a stink bug early. We found technology that had been designed for bomb detection that could suddenly be used for identifying these early infestations that were causing billions of dollars of merchandise loss across the shipping industry. And so to answer your question, we go in there expecting to know nothing at first. We don't want to assume it's going to be autonomous vehicles, or it's going to be micromobility or multimodal hubs or electrification. We have a bunch of assumptions, but we try not to let them kind of infiltrate the process, because the process might show that actually, if you're a citizen of Corktown or a citizen of Detroit, these are the things that are problems for you when it comes to mobility. And my team making an assumption or a guess about that from Brooklyn would never make any sense. And so that's why at least the first 3 months typically are research and discovery, finding out what really does matter and what we should focus on.
Thanks. I do love that story. I think it's just so unexpected, and I think that's the beauty of it. So I'll be interested as these studios come up to see if there's something similar that happens for us and we have a stink bug story of our own. Totally. But so that being said, you kind of ended on a great note there around the community itself. And I guess that leads me to the Civic Studio and really thinking about, you know, I've shared some of the problems that we've heard in our work with the community. I've shared those with you and thinking about this civic focused studio. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how how New Lab comes in and really engages with the community, builds partnerships, and really creates opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think certainly one part of it is the COVID-19 example of kind of what we've had to do over the last couple of months with the pandemic here in New York City is an example of where public need becomes something that we team up to kind of solve. And so that was an example where the New York City EDC came to us because they had concerns around ventilator shortages for New York City hospitals, and a prediction that by mid-April, there would be a lack of ventilators and kind of the key equipment necessary for keeping people alive when infected with COVID-19. And so that was an example where the city was saying this is an important need for the city. They didn't have 12 months. Our typical cycle is obviously a lot longer, and they gave us about 6 or 7 weeks to come up with a solution that could help deliver an early stage prototype to hospitals. And so long story short, our co-founder, Scott Cohen, found a design and paper from MIT from 2010 that had a unique approach to an alternative to a ventilator. We built a team out of 10x Beta, which is the product and design team here at New Lab. We teamed up with Boyce Industries, which is a scaled advanced manufacturer here in Long Island City. And we're able to deliver hundreds, if not thousands, of ventilator units to these hospitals in New York City at a quick amount of time. And so the role we want to play is being there and available to work with different organizations across the community, whether they're technology hubs, government bodies, academia, or corporations, to find out what the challenges are in that city specifically, and then use our framework and our team to see what progress we can make on those challenges. Hopefully we don't have to do it again in 6 or 7 weeks, but the kind of elongated 12-month program is where we see the most amount of impact.
That's great. That's so relevant today too. Thank you. You did share that story earlier this year, and I thought, what a great moment. What, like, something to be so proud of. So thank you. I guess just kind of to wrap up the studio idea, and this is, I don't think we've touched on it, and it is always a question, I think, for people who are just learning about them. Could you talk a little bit about how the studios sustain themselves and actually take the vision further than was originally thought? So they're not kind of just these 12-month engagements, but actually something much greater.
Yeah, it's a great plan. And many of our studios are in their second or third years, so they continue on even after the original kind of funding of a 12-month program. I think a few things happen. One is many of the kind of companies that come and build technology and prototype and pilot it in Michigan and in Detroit specifically, they end up then scaling their organizations locally. And so those companies become startups that want to be based in Detroit. We then move to obviously looking to build and open a permanent new lab in Detroit, because we're now building this community, building this brand around New Lab, and also bringing technologists from other parts of the world to participate. So one is that growing community starts giving us kind of great opportunity to make this a permanent presence like what we see in Brooklyn. The second piece is you start to get other corporations and government bodies interested in participating. Our 5G studio with Verizon is a great example where one of New York's largest providers of electricity has now asked if they can also sponsor the studio, add more funding to it, to then expand it to new tracks of work, to bring on new areas of potential focus and impact. And so usually what starts as just a partnership with Michigan Central and New Lab, new corporations will come in and want to be involved. I already got a call last night from one of the country's largest car rental firms that said, how can we get involved? We want to participate. We have lots of things we want to test. We want to bring our prototypes and our early stage technology to Detroit. And so you start to get both government and corporations that want to contribute funding to ensure the studio continues, but also so that it focuses on some areas that are important to them. And so the goal overall, just like New York City helped seed fund the opening of New Lab, it eventually became a sustainable business that the city no longer has to fund, and we're actually growing organically. The same as the objective with the studios is that the Michigan Central and Ford are helping to kick this off, but we're going to build the momentum and bring in other partners so that this becomes an ongoing, evergreen concept that continues to attract technologists both within the state and from around the world to come to Detroit.
Thank you. That's awesome. So I do want to get to the questions that are coming into us, but before we do that, I'm always impressed with the stories that you tell about the work that's happening in New Lab. And I thought, just based on our audience, it might be great to kind of take everyone through experience with a startup from beginning to end. And I really love the Jump Bike story, so maybe you could share that with us.
Yeah, sure. That's a great story. So Jump is one of our companies and one of our largest acquisitions that have occurred in the past 3 to 4 years. Ryan, who is the founder of Jump, at the time he applied to be part of New Lab, it was a company called Social Bicycles, similar to most of these bike sharing networks you see in cities. They've been operating for some time. He applied a few times to be part of the New Lab community, and certainly the business looked to have great potential, but we didn't see any advanced technology that was being utilized in their product vision or their business overall. And so it didn't seem like a fit for us. We reject a lot of companies that have great potential, used car marketplaces or apps for finding the best deal on gas. But if it's not using anything we would consider advanced technology, we typically don't welcome it. The flip side is we have companies that are 3D printing rocket engines to launch CUBE satellites in space. That's going to be a long timeline to commercialization with a lot of risk, but we love that talent and the support that type of talent provides to all the entrepreneurs here. And so the jump story was that after being rejected a couple of times due to that kind of lack of advanced tech, Ryan actually came here to New Lab and said he wanted to speak to someone about his application. And he explained to us that he was looking to build and test an electric pedal assist bike, like the jump bikes you all know of today, that he needed our wood shop and our metal shop. He needed our community and some of our resources to build the first version of this bike. And so he got going, and him and his team were amazing and built the first prototype of that bicycle. And then they needed to pilot it somewhere. So they started using it in the Navy Yard, private 300 acres, just like the Corktown campus. You'd have the ability to test technology there. And so they started testing the bike. And the first thing that happened was when you weren't riding it, the lock wouldn't remain charged. It would lose power over time because the pedals were the major source of electrification for the lock system. And so they mentioned this to us, and we introduced them to Shane, who's the CEO of Voltaic, a company here from Australia. They build solar arrays for everything from backpacks to trains and vehicles to provide power to anywhere that's off the grid or difficult to access electricity. And so Voltaic and Jump teamed up to build a solar array specifically designed for the bike so that it could charge the lock when it was outdoors without being ridden. So then they've got the product and a lot of other challenges they went through, obviously, as a team, but they got the product to the point where they were ready to deploy it publicly as a pilot. So then you have to go through the amazing red tape of how do you get a bike program piloted and launched in New York City? Like, how do you navigate that red tape as an early stage startup, as someone who hasn't had experience in that type of a challenge? And so Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Borough president, had helped us open New Lab back 3 or 4 years ago. And so David Belt, one of our founders, called him and said, could you come try this bike? Tell us what you think about it, experience it firsthand. And there's a great photo of Eric originally riding one of the jump bikes through New Lab itself, down the middle of the building, then taking it out around the Navy Yard to see what it was like. And long story short, that bike experience led to approval for them to deploy 600 bikes in a couple specific boroughs of New York City to pilot the technology, allow customers to start using it. A few months after that, they were approached by Uber and eventually acquired for north of $250 million. And that was just over 2 years from when they kind of came to the front desk to join the community. And so that's an example where New Lab's not responsible for their success. What's responsible for their success is the collaboration with the community, the talent and resources they were able to access, the partnerships and contacts we were able to give to them to help kind of make progress around the pilots. And the overall access to venture capital and corp dev teams that come in through New Lab on a daily basis. And it's one of the stories we're the most proud of because it shows that all of these right ingredients, facilities, network, introductions, as well as a community that wants to help you on your challenges and your projects, ends up being an environment that allows startups to be more successful more of the time.
I love that. I love that story. I think that it's such a great example of the ecosystem that you guys have started there. It's just amazing. So thanks for sharing that, Sean. I know there are some questions waiting for us. So I think I'll turn it over. I think Monica's going to come back on and we'll take those questions and then we'll wrap up.
Amazing. Hey, Monica.
Hello. This was good stuff. I agree. I like this. I love the stories. I love this whole motion of what's getting put in place. So excited, but I want to make sure that people get a chance to answer their questions. Sure. So we have a couple of folks in here. Up top, we have for Sean, someone from D Ford, and they said, what do you imagine that the innovation studios, particularly the Civic Studio, which is supporting innovation, do you imagine that going into other areas other than mobility as it's strictly defined? And I know you talked a little bit about some of the variation, but can you like elaborate about like how the studios are grouped subject-wise?
Yeah, I think that's, so at the conclusion of that first segment, that kind of first 3 or 4 months of research and discovery, we would come back to Julie and the Michigan Central team and any of the other key stakeholders involved, the Ford team as well, and say, this is what we've heard. This is what people are saying we should focus on. This is what needs to change or improve in the mobility offering in and around Detroit. And so those insights are going to drive our direction, the tracks that we develop, the strategic areas of focus. And so if we hear, similar to going back to the old stink bug, if everybody keeps telling us mobility is not the problem, this is the problem, data access, information access, connectivity, whatever that is, then we bring that feedback back to the studio and say, actually, we're hearing that maybe this should be one track of focus, that maybe there's bandwidth to try to tackle this issue that is connected or adjacent to mobility that may not have been what we originally envisioned. It sounds like Julie would be happy to have one of those stink bugs come up. So that's right, is that we follow the guidance and the insights the research provides, the interviews provide, the workshops provide. We follow where they tell us to go versus us having an assumption around the direction.
Okay, I love it. Good stuff. And then so a slight variation on that, in addition to like going in different areas, and I think I just let you elaborate. Does New Lab operate any other places besides Brooklyn, and do they plan to?
Yeah, so our physical presence only exists in Brooklyn. We have 2 buildings here in Brooklyn, an 85,000 square foot home of 155 companies. And then we have another building down the street that is for companies that get too big here. One of our biggest problems, our #1 reason for exiting the community, is that your employee base gets too large. And so you don't have enough room here. And so that's a larger building for companies that need full floors for up to 70 different employees. So we have no other physical center of operation. We are extremely focused and excited about Detroit being our second location and our second market for all the reasons we discussed. But we do have pilots in our innovation studios that operate in multiple US cities, but also around the world. We have a mining studio with Vimsan, the iron ore company from India. That mining studio is focused on improving everything from the use of autonomous vehicle technology in mines through to safety in the mines. How do you identify leaks in mines in advance of it impacting the health of workers negatively? And so we have a range, there's about 5 startups involved in that studio from around the world who are piloting their technology later this year in the mines of Goa in India. We have an emergency and refugee housing studio that's developing accommodations in Uganda. And we've also seen that our urban tech studio, when this announcement went out about Michigan, we have a range of companies piloting technology here in New York, the ones we mentioned in the urban tech studio. And we already heard from 3 or 4 of them saying, can we take our pilots from Brooklyn and launch them in Detroit? Can we test whether our technology works there as well? Can we see if our insights are just as valuable in the state of Michigan as they are the state of New York? So although our physical home exists in Brooklyn, our community stretches out, and the pilots and studios we're operating stretch out around the globe, which is one of the things we love about this community here. 38% of the technologists here relocated their business to be in New York and to be at New Lab. So we hope that continues or is even bigger, where we can support the existing entrepreneurs of the state of Michigan, but also attract new ones. Modern Meadow is one of our companies here. They grow leather from collagen proteins. So it's a vegan leather. It doesn't involve animal hide. They relocated from Palo Alto to come here to Brooklyn and have been based here ever since. So we're excited of using New Lab's presence, in addition to all the other programs and assets in Detroit, to be a magnet for talent, bring more people to Detroit to start, and then hopefully scale their businesses.
We like the sound of that, definitely. Okay, so next up for Julie, there are many agencies and place-based organizations in Southwest Detroit working and supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses for over 20 to 50 years. Is it your plan to collaborate with them as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, I don't know if I put a pin on it in the previous slides, but definitely looking at bringing in those collaborators into the space. I've met with several people. In fact, I joined the team last fall, and the first thing that I did was really try to get out into not just Corktown, but the Detroit and the state of Michigan itself, making different road trips, and doing some benchmarking, really finding out what's going on in this environment and how we can connect and how we can make this like just such an amazing place for everyone. I definitely see a place for all of the collaborators who are interested in working with us. And I would say, I think at the end of this presentation, there'll be ways that we can connect. So please reach out to me if you haven't already heard from me.
Okay. And then we have Well, go to that.
There's so many good questions. I'm just
I know,
looking.
I'm like, we have a short amount of time, so we have to like, pick really quickly. Okay.
Can I answer the one on, there's one question from Teresa that says, have you involved residents in the new lab, such as apprentices and training? It's another area that we're incredibly proud of. We have two major education programs here. The first is a middle school kind of STEAM program that has north of 1,000 middle school students from Brooklyn Public Schools come to experience technology. They get to experience what AR and VR could be like, or robotics, and actually expand their views of what career potential is. When I grew up, I thought you had to be a lawyer or a doctor or a fireman. I didn't know that you could start a robotics company or 3D print, rocket engines. So we try to expand that kind of the middle school purview of what they can do in their careers. And then we also have a program that brings 200 high school students and pairs them up with startups here so that they can complete essentially like spread out internships over a wider period of time. But it allows a student from a Brooklyn high school who says they're passionate about machine learning or they're passionate about indoor farming. They can then join a startup here at New Lab that is focused on exactly that area, so they can learn directly from that. So those two education programs have worked very well in New York, and we'd be thrilled to also expand those to the state of Michigan if possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we're running out of time. Try to squeeze in one more each.
Can I answer one?
Yeah.
I'm gonna follow Sean's lead and look at the questions. So I actually scrolled to the bottom and I see a question that says, how will the studios integrate with the University of Michigan Innovation Center coming to Detroit? I don't have a solid answer for that, but we at Ford and at Michigan Central are super excited to work with U of M. We have an MOU in place around research and Corktown with U of M. So we're excited about that. We've had numerous discussions on how we work together. And I think that I alluded to it in the beginning, but we really see Michigan Central as this node on a mobility network. And so we see ourselves connecting in the city to other innovation areas. TechTown is an amazing place. We're looking forward to connecting with them, the DCI, all of the academics in the city, Wayne State. I'm an alum, so super excited about our connections with Wayne State, as well as the University of Michigan and beyond. As Sean has said as well, there's so many academic resources here in Michigan. We're really fortunate. And so that's really how I see us working together. We're looking at how we can do this together. So it's so important for the future.
I love to hear that. Several variations of questions are, how can new startups get connected to the ecosystem for New Lab?
So you want me to go to the next slide? Let me see if I can quickly here. Okay, so this slide, this is what we wanted to end on, but I think it's great now. So Sean and I are both available for questions. If you want to connect with us, just send an email to corktown@ford.com. I think that's probably the most direct way to get a hold of us. Sean, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, that's great. That's fine. I'm Sean at newlab.com, SHAUN. The spelling's a bit weird, but other than that, it's pretty simple. So happy to take emails that way or through Corktown at Ford. Either way is great.
Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. I so appreciate you guys taking the time to share this. I'm so sorry. There's so many questions in the chat. We're not going to get to all of them, but we definitely appreciate you guys spending some time with us today and talking about the new collaboration. I'm excited. Been a long-term fan of different innovation projects and things like that, and looking forward to finding ways that any of all the companies that we work with can be involved in just spreading that news out to the different groups. So thank you guys again. Thank you, Sean Stewart from New Lab. Thank you, Julie Rossini from Ford. Thank you, Ford, for sponsoring this and for being a long-term sponsor of Detroit Startup Week. We're definitely looking forward to more collaborations and more great announcements. Yeah, well, thank you guys.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, for the broader audience, we have one last keynote today at 4 o'clock. We have Marcus Lemonis from CNBC's The Profit. He'll be answering business questions there about reinvention, business, small business, things like that. And there's open networking now until 5 o'clock. But thank you guys. This has been an amazing week, and having this be the end of the week is a great apple in the thing. So have a good rest of your day. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us.
Take care.
Thank you.